Hey guys, welcome to learning class. So today we are going to do the reading answers of a reading academic passage Wind Power. Okay, so without wasting any time, let's begin. Let's do it. So the first two questions are multiple choice questions. Let's begin with the first question. People do not like coal and oil powered power production because it damages the environment. That's option A. It is wasteful. Option B. They cannot be replaced once consumed. Option C. And all of the above. Option D. So answer is D. That is all of the above. And now let's see how this answer came from the passage. Okay, so in the second paragraph, let's start reading. Traditional means of electricity generation using coal or oil fueled plants have two major drawbacks. They pollute the environment. So okay, they pollute the environment, which means that it damages the environment. So that is why A option is true. Okay, and the fuels they use are inefficient, which means the oil or the coal which they use to generate electricity, they are inefficient. Here inefficient means that they are not efficient, which means they do not produce all of their energy into the electricity. Some of the energy gets wasted, which means that these kind of fuels are wasteful. So okay, so B option is also true, that this is inefficient, this is wasteful type of electricity generation. Okay, and now also the fuels are non-renewable, which means that we can only use them once and they cannot be renewed after a time period. So C option is also true, that they cannot be replaced once consumed. Okay, they cannot be reused. So as all of the options are true, our answer of the first question is D, that is all of the above. And now let's move towards second question. Second question is wind power. A option has only been used recently. B promotes environmental awareness. C avoided accidents at Chernobyl and Three Mile Island. And D is not depleted when used. Okay, so now let's read the last line of the paragraph second. Wind power, however, is clean, renewable, and with modern advances surprisingly efficient. So they are saying, as you know, that coal or oil fueled plants, they were inefficient. Now they are saying that wind power is efficient, which means it does not waste anything. It totally converts the energy into the electricity. Okay, so that means the D option is true, because wind power is not depleted. Depleted here means wasted, so it is not wasted when used. So that's how the D option came. But let's also see how the A, B, C options are false. That means they are not true for the case of the wind power. So first of all, they are saying that wind power has only been used recently. Let's see. So, in response to growing environmental awareness, there have been calls for greener alternative. So they are saying, as environmental awareness is growing, in the whole world, there have been calls for greener alternatives, but they have not told, that that green alternative is the wind power that has been recently used. So it is not given that wind power has only been recently used or not. So that's why A option was not the answer. And now if we talk about the B option, that is promotes environmental awareness, that is also not true, because they are saying in response to growing environmental awareness. So environmental awareness is growing, and that is why they are calling for the greener alternatives. But it does not say that wind power is the type of power that promotes environmental awareness, but it's the opposite. Environmental awareness is growing, that is why they are asking for greener alternatives like wind power. Okay, it is not that wind power it promotes environmental awareness. That is totally false. That is why B option was not our answer. And now let's see the third option. Okay, there they are saying that nuclear power, while more efficient and less polluting, is seen by many people as unacceptable because of the dangers of the accidents, such as those that happened at Chernobyl or Three Mile Island. Okay, so they are saying that nuclear power, it has some dangers of the accidents, such as those that happened at Chernobyl or Three Mile Island. So they are associating those accidents to nuclear power. But it does not mean that if those accidents are, related to nuclear power, that if we would use wind power, then those accidents would be avoided. It is not so. Accidents at Chernobyl and Three Mile Island are not even related to this wind power, so it cannot avoid those accidents. So the C option is also not true, and hence the answer of the second question is D. Now let's move to the questions 3 to 7. In this, there is a summary of British wind power, and we have to write one or two words as our answers. Okay, so now let's read. While there was a great deal of interest in wind power in the 1970s, so they are saying that there was a great deal of interest in wind power in the 1970s, it diminished in the 1980s, which means that in 1970 they were talking about wind power a lot, but its interest, it decreased, it diminished in the 1980s. So let's see where it's written. Okay, so the third paragraph, first line, let's start reading. In the 1970s, Britain was in the forefront of research into wind power. Also, they were talking about the British wind power summary. So now they are saying that in 1970, Britain was at the front, They wanted to talk about wind power. They wanted to research into wind power a lot. The interest in wind diminished in the 1980s. Okay, but this interest, it diminished in the 1980s. So clearly that's our answer here, diminished in the 1980s, and so we have written it diminished in the 1980s. Now let's read what's next. This was mainly, now why the interest decrease, what was its reason? Okay, so this was mainly due to the intense support for nuclear power. So there was very much support for nuclear power, and that was the reason why the interest in wind power was lost. Okay, so now let's see its reason in the passage as it is stated. So the wind power diminished in the 1980s due to cheap North Sea oil, a strong pro-nuclear lobby, and pricing structures that made it uneconomical to set up wind farms. Okay, so they were saying that in the 1980s, the interest in wind power diminished due to the cheap North Sea oil. So it was a strong pro-nuclear lobby, which pro-nuclear, the word pro-nuclear means that in the favor of nuclear power plants, suggesting that there should be increase in the number of nuclear power plants or like that. So for the word strong, here has been written intense. Okay, and for the word pro, which means in favor of or in support of, here the word has been written support, and so definitely our answer would be nuclear. Strong pro nuclear lobby, intense support for nuclear power, and little help in making wind power affordable. So wind power was less affordable at that time because the nuclear power plant, it was economical, while to set up wind farms was uneconomical. So that's how nuclear is the answer of the fourth question. Now let's proceed further. So even though Britain has some of the best winds in Europe, the first wind farm was only built in 1991. The farm at Delabole came out of opposition by locals to a nuclear power plant. Now they are saying that the wind farm that has been established at Delabole, it came out of opposition by locals to a nuclear power plant, which means that the locals, they opposed that there should not be the construction of nuclear power plant. Instead, there should be the construction of a wind power plant. So let's see where it is written in the passage. So here it is. Located at Delabole in Cornwall, the farm was originally the idea of locals who opposed the construction of a nuclear power plant nearby and decided to set up a private company to generate power for the area using the wind. So they opposed the nuclear power, but they were in support of the wind power. So who? Locals, the locals that resided there over there. So definitely the answer will come locals because they were the ones who opposed nuclear power plants. Now, next, initially they were opposed by local officials. So, those local residents, they were opposed by local officials due to the fears about noise and possible obstruction to television signals. So, the local officials, they opposed the local residents because they thought that there would be noise problems and possible obstruction. Obstruction means there would be interference, to the television signals, those wind when they will generate energy, the noise it will come, then it will obstruct the television signals. So let's see where it has been written. Okay, the next line it's written. They had to fight opposition from the local government. So local government means local officials, as it has been written in the summary, that is in the questions part, and the other local residents who thought the turbines would be noisy. So the turbines, wind turbines that would rotate, they would be noisy and might even interfere with the television signals. So for the word interfere, there had been written obstruction. It would obstruct the television signals. So definitely our answer would come television signals. And now let's see what's written next in the summary. This opposition was eventually overcame. So the opposition that the local officials did, it was overcome only after they were shown successful examples from Denmark. So after the local government, they saw that wind power plants are successfully there using converting the energy into electricity in Denmark, then this opposition was overcome. Okay, now let's see where it has been written. But eventually, after showing local officials working wind farms, that the wind farms they worked successfully in Denmark, they won, and now there are 10 huge white wind turbines in on the Dalabol Hills. So the local officials, the local government, they saw that in Denmark wind farms are working successfully, and that is how who's they the local residents, those who wanted to support wind power plants, they won, and now there are 10 wind turbines on the Dalabol Hills. So definitely the opposition was eventually overcome only after they were shown successful examples, the successful wind farm examples, you can say, from Denmark. Or even you could write after they were shown successful examples from Danish farm. If you not want to write Denmark, then you could write Danish farm, because Danish means related to Denmark. So Danish farms are the farms that are in Denmark. So either you could write Denmark in your answer or you could write Danish farm. Both will be correct. So now let's proceed towards questions 8 to 13. Okay, so there are some countries written Britain. So for Britain, if we think Britain is our answer, we would have to write BR in our answer. And if we think Germany is the answer, then we would have to write G. If Denmark, then D. The United States, US, Ireland, IRE. And if we think that it is not related to any of the countries above, then we would write N, which means none of the countries. Okay, so now let's see. So we like have to match these statements with the countries. So let's see what are the questions. So the eighth question is plans to reduce 5% of its power, sorry, plans to produce 5% of its power using wind power. So which one is the country that is planning to produce 5% of its total power using the wind power plants? So the answer is Britain. Now let's see where it's written in the passage. So here it is written that Britain is catching up and the government has set a target of 10% of all electricity to come from renewable sources by 2010. So by 2010, which means that Britain is planning that by 2010 it would produce 10% of its total electricity from the renewable energy sources. Half of this is to be from wind power. So 10% of electricity is to be produced from renewable sources. Half of this is to be from wind power, which means that 5% of this electricity that would be produced from renewable sources would come from wind power. So we can say yes, that Britain is planning to produce 5% of its total energy from the wind power renewable source. So definitely the answer would come BR, that is Britain. Now let's see what's the ninth question. produces 50% of its power from wind. So the word produces, it means that they are talking of the present tense, which means at present they produce 50% of their total power from the wind power plants. So the answer is none of the countries, that is N. Now let's see. In the passage, 50% of the power generation from wind energy, it's only written about Denmark and not of any other country. So here it has been written that Denmark now, so at present, which means it produces 30% of its electricity from wind power, and this is predicted to rise to 50% by 2010. So they are saying that by 2010, Denmark would be able to produce 50% of its energy from wind power. But at present, it only produces 30% of its electricity from wind power, which means that Denmark cannot come as the answer of the ninth question, because in the ninth question they were talking about the present tense, that at present it produces 50% of its power from wind, but Denmark at present it produces only 30% of its power from wind. So there was no any country related to the 50% of its power from wind written in the whole passage. There was one just uh, written, that was Denmark, and that also planned to produce by 2010. So definitely the answer would be none of the countries, as none of the countries could be matched for the ninth question statement. So the answer is N. And now the 10th question, produces very little of its power using wind. So now also again they are talking about the present tense, that which is the country which produces little, very little of its power using wind energy. The answer is United States, US. Now it's written, sorry, now it's written in the last passage, the first line, the use of wind power is far less advanced in the USA. So USA uses wind power in a very less amount, only 5% of America's power comes from the wind. So US only generate 5% of its electricity using the wind power, which means that it produces very little of its power using wind energy. So that's how the answer is US. And now let's see 11th question. Which country will have the world's largest wind farm? Okay, so they are saying that which is the country that will have the world's largest wind farm, and the answer is IRE. That means Ireland. Okay, now it's written in the last line of the passage. If constructed, so it is quite unclear from here. Let's start reading from one or two lines above. However, there is an increased interest in wind power. There are plans to produce a huge offshore wind farm off the coast of Cape Cod on the northeast seaboard. So they are planning to build a huge offshore wind farm. The farm will take up over 25 square miles, having 170 turbines, and produce 420 megawatt at a cost of $600 million. So okay, so now they are talking about if constructed, if this farm that they were talking about to build on off the coast of Cape Cod on the northeast seaboard, if this farm is constructed, it will be the world's second biggest wind farm. So this farm would be the world's second biggest wind farm after the 520 megawatt farm planned in Ireland. So which means that there is also the planning of building another farm in Ireland which would produce 520 megawatt of energy. So they are saying that this farm that they are planning to build on the coast of Cape Cod on the northeast seaboard, this would be the second biggest farm after the 520 megawatt farm planned in Ireland, which means the farm they are talking about to planning, to build in Ireland, this would be the biggest farm in the world. And the farm that they are saying to build on the coast of Cape Cod on the northeast seaboard, it would be the second biggest wind farm. So definitely, which country will have the world's largest wind farm? Ireland. Okay, so that's how the answer is IRE. Don't get confused, in the second biggest farm and the biggest farm. So I hope that I have made clear that how the answer Ireland came. Okay, still if you have any doubt, you can just ask me in the comment section. Now let's see what's the 12th question. Used to have the world's biggest offshore wind farm. So which country it used to have? So it is kind of a situation that at present the farm that has been built in this country, it is not the world's biggest offshore wind farm, but in the past it used to have the world's biggest offshore wind farm. So the answer is Britain. Now let's see where it is written in the passage. So here only, the first in Britain was built, in 2000 at Blyth, north of Newcastle, and was the largest in the world until May 2001. So let's see what they were talking about. They were talking about wind farms being built offshore. So they were talking about offshore wind farms, and they are saying that the first offshore wind farm was built in 2000 in Britain, and it was the world's largest offshore wind farm until May 2001, which means that at present it is not the world's largest wind farm. From the period of 2000, that was its construction, until the May 2001, it was the world's largest offshore wind farm, but at present it is not so. When a 20 turbine farm was opened at Middelgruden of Copenhagen. So when a offshore wind farm was built at Copenhagen, that became the world's largest offshore wind farm. So definitely, Britain was the country which used to have the world's biggest offshore wind farm. So that's why the answer is BR, that is Britain. Now the last question, which country is the biggest producer of wind power in Europe? So in the continent Europe, they have talked about a lot of countries. Britain is in Europe, Germany is in Europe, Denmark is in Europe, Ireland is in Europe. Okay, so these are the countries that are in Europe, and now they are asking which is the biggest producer of wind power in Europe. Now let's see. Okay, so of all the countries they have written here, so here 13th answer question, it has not been highlighted, I forgot. Okay, so here it has been written that Germany alone produces the half of the wind generated electricity in Europe. So in Europe, suppose that um, the electricity that is generated from the wind power, so of this 100% wind generated electricity, 50% of this wind generated electricity, it is alone produced in the Germany. So which means that Germany alone is the biggest producer of the wind power in Europe. So that's why the answer is G, that is Germany. So with this, the explanations of how the reading answers of this passage wind power came is over. And now if you have any doubt, you can just ask me in the comment section. Okay, I hope that you would have understood these questions very well. So that's for today. Goodbye.